Reading the stories, I had always been a skeptic. Stories of alleged first-hand experiences, hauntings, possessions. They're all well and good for a quick chill, a cheap thrill, something I read to get my heart rate up. Getting scared can be fun sometimes, as long as you don't overdo it. Just a little something silly to get worked up about. In my lurking in books and on numerous sites on the internet, credible or not, I have come across many stories or accounts about ghosts, demons, the Jersey Devil, you name it. Recently, I have found my way into stories about the B.E.K or black-eyed kids. No, these children did not get a black eye from a fight, and I don't believe there will be a soul out there with a backbone to try and attack these kids. B.E.Ks are kids, if that was not straightforward enough. Usually, from all of the accounts I have read, they are in their teenage years, if they even physically age at all. Their eyes are pitch black, no pupils, no corneas, no white showing at all, pitch black. They have olive skin and wear run-of-the-mill clothing, as in hoodies. However, in a non-physical sense, they always bring with them an overwhelming sense of fear and dread. They're intriguing, and when approached by them, again, from all the accounts I have read, it's like you're in a slight hypnosis, though you quickly snap out of it when your instincts take over, usually as you meet their eyes. Then, there are the theories. The theories about what these B.E.Ks may be. These theories range from lost souls to alien or human hybrids, and even to vampires. Though the latter may be an extreme stretch to link the B.E.K to the current social infatuation of vampires found commonly in young persons. In light of all this, I have always been a very fact-based person. If its existence was not apparent or the existence of the thing in question was not testable and verifiable to me, it did not exist. However, there was this night. One long terrifying night which still haunts me to this very day. It showed me the proof required to open my eyes and mind. My story begins when I left my mom's house. I had gone over to visit her because my father, her husband of 63 years, recently passed away, and my mom wasn't taking it too well. I knew she needed support from her loved ones, and I was more than willing to go visit and keep her company, but it was getting late. My mom lives in the suburbs. Tidy lawns, plenty of neighbors, paved roads, and even though it was near 11 p.m. when I left, the streets were extremely lit by the street lights who always had your safety and ease of mind at heart. These lights only lit the road though, and glancing across the street, the houses were cast in an eerie shadow. Even a rather safe, charming little neighborhood can seem spooky and uninviting when cast in the shadows. I admit, I was terribly chilled. Sliding into my car, I revved the engine and waved to my mother who was standing in the doorway, wrapped comfortably in a warm shawl. She waved back, her old and fragile arm shaking. I saw her mouth saying, "Be careful," and I smiled, backing out of the driveway. I turned out of the neighborhood, deciding to take the back way, the shorter way home tonight. In hindsight, that might not have been a good idea. I live a significant ways away, out in the middle of the country in the old farmhouse I grew up in, which my father had left in my name when he and my mom had moved out into a smaller place. More easy to take care for and affordable and social. My father had always told me growing up, "Don't go out at night and always beware of the devils." He was a strong believer in anything and everything paranormal. A very superstitious man, and I always had to resist the urge to laugh at his words, but I knew he meant well. Driving down the dark country roads, there were no street lights, and the half-assed paved road was cracked and filled with potholes. The fields on either side of the road were empty, just blank stretches of overgrown grass and unattended shrubbery. The dark outline of the trees of the woods could be seen looming all the way across the fields on the shadowy horizon. One might have seen a deer or two once in a while in those fields, but not tonight. The moon offered a little light as the sky rolled with dark threatening clouds, ready to burst with rain or a storm at any moment. Sure enough, a few moments later, the low grumble of a thunder sounded, heavy and long. However, no rain fell just yet, much to my pleasure. I hate driving at night and in the rain, and putting those two together would end badly. I just knew it. Accompanied only by the occasional roll of thunder, I started to feel a bit anxious. I can't explain it, I just felt shaken up. Probably because it was night and it could start raining. Or maybe I had been reading too much ghost stories and legends, and tonight seemed to reflect the mood of the stories I read almost obsessively. To try and calm myself, I flicked on my old car radio and turned the old-fashioned knob back and forth, slowing down a bit as I attempted to find a station that came in clearly. Nothing doing. Weird. There was a broadcasting tower right near here. It usually came in perfectly, clear as day, but still nothing. The white noise and the static of the blank stations was doing nothing to appease my anxiety. I gripped the steering wheel tightly as more thunder boomed from the sky. Aggravated, I forcefully shut off the radio and, glancing down at the dashboard, I noticed I was nearly out of gas. I searched the road for a sign for a nearby gas station, and as I was scanning the side of the road, I noticed from the corner of my eye two figures walking on the side of the road, shrouded in the shadows. They were walking slowly, then one turned around, walking backwards, his or her thumb sticking out. I felt compelled to pull over, give them a ride, and I found my hands turning the wheel slightly, but I pulled back, realizing how stupid it will be of me to accept two random strangers into my car in the middle of the night on the backcountry road. I sped up and passed them, trying not to look at them as I did so, though I felt oddly intrigued by them. As I focused on the road ahead, it started drizzling, dropping my mood another level or two. Along with the rain, the thunder seemed louder, closer as the storm moved in. A few seconds passed until I gave in to my compulsion to look at the two figures, and I glanced in my rearview mirror. It seemed as if the two were walking faster and the one no longer had his thumb out, but it had to be my imagination. How would I be able to tell if they were walking faster or not? It was rainy and dark. Looking back at the road, I almost missed a sign that alerted me of a gas stop up ahead. A sigh of relief passed my lips and I slowed down, looking for an indication of the stop, pushing the thought of the two figures from my head. Soon, I was pulling into the gas station slowly as the rain started to pick up. The store was closed, but luckily, they had a 24-hour gas pump service. I shut off my car and hesitantly shuffled out of the metal shell and glanced over my shoulder, still not being able to shake the nervous feeling that had manifested inside me earlier that night. I stood under the light of the overhang, trying to figure out how to work the pump, which seemed so overcomplicated in the dim light, and with my mind not being able to focus on this simple task. The rain picked up more, heavier and louder against the concrete of the gas stop as I finally was able to get the pump into my car, forcing my hand to stop its shaking. I had a horrible feeling that my shaking wasn't just because of the bitterly cold night air. Suddenly, the overhang light started flickering widely, a couple going out altogether. It seemed as if the temperature dropped 20 degrees in a few seconds, and as I glanced around, a sinking feeling started to blossom in my stomach. As if in slow motion, I turned around, facing back towards the road, the long, lonely road, and saw what I expected to be there. But even as much as I knew what I'd see, I still felt the drop of my stomach, the color draining from my face, and I breathed a sharp cold breath forcefully as it almost caught in my throat. Across the street, the two figures were standing facing me. They started crossing the street slowly and I fumbled with the gas pump. It had only been a few moments, but it seemed as if the gas pump was taking its precious time. I was shaking hard now as the thunder boomed once more and I looked back up, and the figures were now at the entrance to the gas stop and my breathing was quick and shallow as I blindly shoved the pump back into its holder, not being able to tear my eyes away from the figures. As they drew closer, I became more frantic, even though now as they walked into the flickering lights of the overhang and I saw that they were just two teenagers. They looked ragged and frigid and soaked from the rain. I straightened up a bit, still terrified, but another compulsive feeling came over me. Similar to the one I experienced in the car was bubbling and I felt obligated to talk to these two, though I insisted to myself to just drive away, not to risk anything. They were extremely close at the next pump when I slid into my car. I was shaking wildly and I fumbled for my keys and I cursed myself as I dropped them on the floor. Leaning down, I swiped them up and sat back up, then a cold, sickening feeling came over me as I came face to face with one of these teens, who had his hands on my window, knocking slowly but forcefully. I rolled down the window a bit, just a bit, no bigger than to allow maybe a small child's hand through. I noticed the other teen standing in the background. She was standing still, but I could see some type of a grin on her face. Before I can utter a word, the teen that was on my window spoke first. "Can you give us a ride into town? We missed the bus and don't have a ride." He spoke slow and something about his voice made me shiver. A cold chill swept down my spine and I opened my mouth but no sound came out. Clearing my throat, I glanced at the dashboard and at the keys in my hand, I answered. "I'm sorry, but I'm not going into town." I stuttered, keeping my eyes down, not at the kids. However, the teenager knocked harsher and made me jump a little as he insisted another time for a ride. I told him no once more and looked up, trying to seem intimidating, which seemed silly. I was trying to be intimidating to a child, but instead, a horrible chilling sight greeted me. I looked the kid right in the eyes and gasped sharply, my back hitting my seat as I went to back away. He had eyes. Oh, he did, but they were blacker than the night. Pitch black. No discernible pupils and no white whatsoever showing. Just pure black. Deep, brooding, and surprisingly intriguing, but my fear got the better of me and I quickly turned the key and my engine revved to life. I thank God, which I had never, ever done before tonight, that my car had not stalled and went to pull away while the kid banged on my window with a pale fist, screaming for a ride. I took off speedily down the road, apologizing to my father again and again that I had laughed at him, that I never took his warning seriously. After a few more minutes, I pulled into my driveway and right into my lawn in front of my porch. I didn't want to spend any more time outside than I already had, and I jumped out of the car, leaving the car door open and ran inside, slamming the door and locking it behind me, even going as far as to put a chair in front of the door, just in case someone or something tries to get in. Sinking into the chair in front of the door, I shivered uncontrollably and started to cry, hiding my face in my hands as two dark figures stood at the end of my driveway. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter, staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was only freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything. Our roommate, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I decided the best bet will be to open the door and show her nothing was there. It sounds a bit silly, but it's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared, and I figured it should work with the puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there, snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumping toward me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid and backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole and I can't explain why I looked, but I just did. Then I saw them. Outside there were two kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me and didn't look much younger. I'm 21 and she looked to be about 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a light shade of honey blonde and she wore it long, with long thin blonde bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's popular right now, and a thin-looking olive-colored pullover style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl who looked to be around 3 or 4, in the same style jeans and a button-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly but had the same shade of hair, tied back in a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under her free arm and it was identical to one my daughter has, as well as their style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in and give them some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. But something about them seemed off. At this point, I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't shushed the dog or grumbled. Nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights, and these kids had no indicators I was at the door. Then, the older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downward and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that was when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, or midnight blue, or a dark, dark purple. They were otherworldly. She spoke again. "Our mother is worried." As someone who had always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I have never been one to believe in these things as a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I never believed any ghost stories from friends and family members eager to tell their tales. I just don't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no question what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door, Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, her tone changed. At first she seemed polite. When I took the second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. She spoke once more. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have broken in. I'll ask again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door and I inched backward, though something inside me seemed to be slowly pulling me back toward the door. It wasn't the physical pulling, it's much as a subconscious telling me I need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim light of the night light. I heard her call me back to the door once more and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about them that black-eyed kids or B.E.Ks can just come in without any permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still fear I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget about it, but this feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, this tells me otherwise. This really freaked me out. Yesterday, I noticed my neighbor hadn't put out all of his Halloween decorations, lights, and whatnot. For the past 2 years I've lived next to him, he has gone all out for Halloween. I don't know him well. He's younger, single, but I know he likes kids, but not in a creepy way. His brother and sister-in-law and their kids are always visiting him, and he plays with his 3 young nieces and nephews out in the yard. So anyway, I got home from work and was walking up my driveway and I saw him outside and said something like, "Hey man, you better get your Halloween stuff up or the house up the street is going to beat you for best decorations." He kind of smiles sheepishly and says that he's actually going to keep his house dark this year and just put a candy out. I asked him if he was going out of town, but he said no. Something happened last year that really scared him. Now I was concerned for my own safety if some weirdos were coming around our neighborhood, so I asked him what happened. He said that last year, he had his brother's family over so they could go trick-or-treat in the neighborhood since they live in an apartment complex that doesn't do much for Halloween. He was pretty much busy that day as he had a bunch of kids come to the door like always. His family took off at around 10:30 in the evening and by then, there were only few older trick-or-treaters, but by 11:30, they were pretty much done. So he was inside, watching TV and the doorbell rings. He grabs the candy bowl and heads over, noticing that it's a little past midnight and that's pretty rude for trick-or-treaters to still be out. But then he noticed that he hasn't turned off all of his decoration lights yet, so his house is still a beacon. He swings the door open and is about to yell boo or something to freak them out, but stops dead when he sees the kids at the door. He said one was probably around 13 to 14 years old and the other was around 16 to 17. Both boys. They weren't dressed up, but he remembers the older one was wearing a flannel checkered shirt. He was immediately overcome with an easiness, like opening the door was a huge mistake. They just stared at him, and he noticed they had really big irises and dilated pupils. He couldn't even see the whites of their eyes, so he figured they were contact lenses. He was frozen there, holding the candy bowl like he couldn't slam the door in their faces as much as he wanted to. So he nervously tried to smile at them, hoping they would break character and ask for a candy or something. The younger one said they had gotten lost and needed to come in and use his phone. That was when he closed the door more than halfway on them and said, "No, I'm sorry." And the older one said something like, "Can we just wait in your house until our parents come get us?" But by then he was convinced that his life was in danger and these kids must be high on something or intending to rob him, and he just kept mumbling, "No, I'm sorry. Good night," as he inched the door closed and locked it. He told me he was so freaking scared at that point that they were going to try to break in through one of his windows or something. But when he looked through the peephole, he saw them turn to leave. He watched TV with the volume really low so he could hear any sounds at all. And he said he stayed up till like 5 in the morning because he was too scared to go to bed and drop his guard down. The whole time he's telling me this, I'm thinking, this sounds familiar, just like the Black-Eyed Kids urban legend. Then I thought, hey, maybe this dude is trying to scare me because, after all, he does have the Halloween spirit. So I'm looking at him incredulously but trying not to seem too gullible. So I'm like, man, that's really crazy. Sounds like the Black-Eyed Kids. He just looks at me blankly. Then he said, "The what? Is that a movie or something?" And I said no, but told him to go look it up online. Like an hour later, I got a knock on my door. I admit, I almost jumped out of my skin, still freaked out with my neighbor's story, thinking that it was the black-eyed kids on the door. When I answered it, it was my neighbor, and his eyes were freaking huge. He swears to me up and down that he had never heard of the black-eyed kids before, and it's so similar to what happened to him. So we talked a while longer, and I told him that quite a few people probably know about the urban legend, and it's possible that it was just teenagers trying to freak people out on Halloween. But he said the fear he felt was so primal, and it came over him the second he opened the door for them. It scared the living crap out of him.